Rich rising, rich rising. Sorry, y'all. Okay, this morning I am ready. Let's get it. Okay, we haven't done this in a few days. Let's listen to this audio, y'all. Sometimes people confuse being alone with loneliness, and it's not the same. I have come up with a new word that I've recently ran across. It's called misanthropy. Misanthropy. And basically it's kind of like the pure just not pleased with human nature. I have studied human nature, and some of the things that we as humans have in us it's really dark. And it seems like everybody is self-seeking. I mean, you have your own flesh to worry about. So I think that's the main reason why people are so selfish, is because, I mean, flesh is weak, and you want to do whatever makes you feel good, right? People don't like to sit with uncomfortableness. And that's something we have to get used to. I think the more we sit with being uncomfortable, we'll learn ourselves better, and we'll become better versions of ourselves. This is just like when I say I'm looking in the mirror. Looking in the mirror is painful. It's the same thing. So being alone, looking in the mirror, all of these things are basically trying to help you understand yourself. And sometimes understanding comes from just being alone. You need to take the time to quiet outside down so you can see what matters to you, because a lot of this stuff is outside forces controlling us. I'm literally watching a show right now called The Sandman, y'all, and I don't think I will ever run out of material, because like I say, the understanding of self is so big and it's so untalked about that we don't talk about it directly, but we talk about it a lot metaphorically. Even when we talk about the Bible, even when we talk about movies and philosophers, even if we're talking about existential crisis or oppression, it's so much of the unconscious involved in all of this. This is why shadow work is the most important thing that you can do with your life. They tend to make it seem like church is doing shadow work. Church does not do shadow work. Church actually pretends that the shadow is something outside of your nature, and that this is something that somebody else is putting on you. And I'm here to tell you that your shadow is a part of you, and you need to hone on it, or it will control you. This is why you have preachers and pastors molesting children and raping kids and women, because they too themselves don't do shadow work. They put all of this on the devil. And I'm here to tell you, it's not the devil's fault. You are the devil. You are your own devil. When you don't face your shadow, when you don't go within and try to understand your inner self, you become the devil. Like Stranger Things. Unhealed wounds become vector. They become a shadow that you cannot control, and you will bleed on others. Okay? So being alone is like a first step of taking back your power. It's not about being lonely. It's not about not having support. Okay? It's about filtering out everybody else's wants and needs, and literally focus on what you want to need. And that way you can address your life properly, and you don't become a victim of your circumstances, which would inevitably make you become an attacker to someone else, because you're not happy. People hurt people, okay? Michael Jackson was one of the only souls on this planet who made a song that transcended the spiritual realm into the physical. He literally made a song, I'm talking to the man in the mirror. He made a song, they don't care about us. He made a song that made people want to do better, want to become better. I don't know any other artist that did that besides Bob Marley. And those two people are not with us anymore. But when you play their music, I don't care who's in the room. If I play a Michael Jackson song or if I play a Bob Marley song, they automatically tone changes. So I do believe people can be possessed with negativity, but I do believe people have the power to get themselves out of it as well. Some people think that negativity is just something you're in, and you it's hard to get out of it once you're in it. No, I'm here to tell you that if you look in the mirror, you can stop the negativity from overcoming you. Because if you think about it, when you're in a state of upsetness, when you're mad and angry, you don't really have control of yourself. You're kind of like in a backseat of your own body. I have recently did some things while being upset that I regret. I'm gonna be honest with you. I kick my own front door in, y'all. I kicked my own front door in because I was so upset with somebody and they had locked me out the door. My own house that I knew I could get back in. But I was so fucking upset that I kicked my own front door in, y'all. And that was to remind me that I haven't got full self-control yet. That when I get upset and I feel that I don't have control, my shadow kicks in and kick my own damn door in. And guess who has to deal with that? Me! I have to deal with that. I have to pay for that. I have to deal with the fact that I'm insecure. Okay? So this is what the problem is. You can definitely pretend like you don't need this work, but I'm here to tell you that you absolutely do. Because even people who know the information like me still fail, still fall. Because once anger takes over the mind, you lose logic. And this is why shadow work is important and going within is important. I'm not saying you won't have any more of those days. I'm just saying you'll have less. And I'm just saying they won't last as long. And I'm also saying they won't be as powerful as they used to be. Because when I kicked my door in, part of me was not thinking clearly, but part of me wanted to know if I could kick the door in. It wasn't even so much as the anger. I just wanted to see if I could do it. In that moment, I was so upset that it just correlated. So again, these are entities around us that make us do certain things. So that is a part of it too. But if we have more understanding of ourselves, then we can have more control and power over when those situations occur. I didn't mean to talk too much at this point. I don't care who's here, who's not here. Those who want to know will be here, and those who need to know will understand and will understand and will continue to journey themselves. Y'all have a beautiful day. I'm going to play this audio. I will not come back and talk for a while. I am going to be doing things in the background. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. I may address them in another video, or I may come back and see them. I don't know. Like, share, and subscribe if you think that this content is important to the world. Also, I want you to steal my ideas and do the same thing, because one day we're going to have a global meditation and I cannot do this myself.
You may have experienced this before, or you may be right in the middle of it. Everything still appears normal on the surface. You continue working, you continue existing, but deep within, there is a very quiet feeling. There is no one truly there to support you anymore. There is no reassurance, no clear signal that everything will be okay. And in that state, a question begins to emerge, not loudly, but inevitably. When no one is by your side, how will you continue? Most of us have never truly learned how to stand alone. We are used to being reflected, guided, validated. But Carl Jung saw this in a completely different way. He believed that the very periods when no one is there are where the deepest transformation begins, not externally, but within the structure of your inner self. In this video, we will go through 7 important inner transitions. What truly happens when you no longer have anyone to rely on, and why that very state, despite its difficulty, can become the starting point for a kind of growth that no external condition can replace. And if you are in that phase, then perhaps this is not the moment you are falling behind, but the moment you begin moving in a direction that very few people dare to enter. Number 1. The collapse of the illusion that someone will come to save you. There are periods in life when you are not exactly failing, but you also cannot say that you are moving forward. You are still there, still trying, still holding everything together. But deep inside, there is a feeling that is hard to name. As if you are waiting for something. Not a specific goal, not a clear plan, but a moment when everything will somehow become easier. Someone will appear, an opportunity will open, or something from the outside will shift the trajectory of your life. And in that silent waiting, you do not realize that you are postponing truly living. This expectation does not come from conscious thought. It comes from a deeper place, where you were once supported, once rescued when things became overwhelming. From those moments, a psychological structure gradually forms. When the difficulty becomes great enough, something or someone will appear to help you through. Over time, that structure becomes an invisible part of how you perceive life, causing you to hold back a portion of your energy for waiting instead of fully stepping into the present. But life does not always repeat itself the way you once experienced it. There are periods when you will receive no intervention at all. No one comes, no signal appears, no sign that things are about to change. And in that silence, you begin to feel a sense of emptiness. Not because the situation is too difficult, but because the expectation within you is no longer being met. What truly collapses is not your life, but the belief that an external force will arrive at the right moment. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When you do not recognize this structure of waiting, you live as if your life depends on factors beyond your control, and you call it not the right time, bad luck, or not meeting the right person yet. But when you begin to see it, you realize that the delay in your life does not come from circumstances, but from the way you quietly place your trust in something that was never guaranteed. I once met someone named Ethan, a designer who had stayed at the same company for 4 years. He did not enjoy the job and always felt he could do more, yet he never left. Whenever asked, he would say, "I think I'll wait a little longer. Maybe my boss will recognize my ability and give me a better position." He worked harder, took on more tasks, but everything remained the same. No one stepped forward and said, "Here is your opportunity." Ethan did not stay because he lacked ability, but because he still believed that recognition from the outside would arrive at the right moment. It was only when the company restructured and the position he had hoped for was given to someone new that Ethan truly faced it. Not because he was not good enough, but because no one had the responsibility to see him the way he wanted to be seen. That moment was not just a disappointment, it was an inner rupture. He realized he had stood still for years, not because circumstances held him back, but because he had placed hope in something that was never guaranteed. Like a boat anchored in the middle of the sea, believing that a current will carry it to shore, when in reality, the ocean has no obligation to take you anywhere. Only when you lift the anchor and steer yourself does the boat begin to move. The moment you realize no one is coming to save you is not a loss. It is a severance from an illusion that has kept you in a state of waiting for too long. And in the space it leaves behind, you may feel empty, as if part of your inner foundation has disappeared. But it is precisely in that space that you truly begin to stand on your own, without relying on anything external. And perhaps that is the true beginning of rising. Not when you have enough conditions, but when you no longer place your future in something that was never guaranteed. Because when you stop waiting for rescue, you do not just lose an illusion, you reclaim your entire capacity to move. Number 2. The feeling of isolation as a gateway into the unconscious. And when you stop waiting for external intervention, something else begins to happen. Quietly, subtly, yet inevitably. Your attention no longer has anything to attach itself to in the outside world, and it begins to turn inward. When your attachment to the outside disappears, You do not immediately become stronger or clearer. On the contrary, you enter a strange state where everything seems slower, emptier, and more difficult to understand. The familiar signals that guided your reactions begin to fade. External goals no longer hold central importance, and you begin to realize that much of your mind was previously filled with things that did not originate from within you. As those layers withdraw, a space opens, not merely emptiness, but a territory that has never been truly observed. Within that space, psychological content begins to emerge in subtle ways. It does not appear in clear forms, nor does it arrive as answers you can immediately grasp. Instead, it surfaces as fragmented memories, recurring images, familiar emotions without clear origins. There are things you thought you had forgotten that return without reason. There are patterns in how you perceive the world that you had never noticed before. And most importantly, none of this is new. It has always been there. You simply never had enough stillness to see it. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." What he emphasized is the necessity of having the courage to face what has always existed beneath the surface of consciousness. When your attention is no longer pulled outward, you begin to see deeper layers within yourself, realizing they have always been present, silently shaping your experience of life. In Greek mythology, there is the story of Orpheus, who descended into the underworld to retrieve Eurydice.
Oh my God.
He did not fight, did not run. He went deeper into a world where light no longer existed, where everything became dim and elusive. His journey was not only about retrieving another person, but about entering a layer of reality where he was forced to see what cannot be seen in the ordinary world. And in that journey, he did not only face loss, but also the deepest parts of himself. At a deeper level, this story is not about love, but about the necessity of entering one's own darkness to reach what is real. The state of isolation functions in the same way. It is not a punishment, but a gateway. When there is no one beside you to reflect you, when the familiar environment no longer defines you, your attention naturally turns inward. You begin to observe what is happening within you, and what makes this experience uncomfortable is its unfamiliarity, the removal of the layers that once covered what has always been underneath. Like entering a dark room that was once always lit, you begin to realize that everything in that darkness was always there. You simply never needed to look closely before. When the light goes out, the room does not become more chaotic. Rather, it is the first time you truly see what has always existed. That is why the feeling of isolation is a sign that you are approaching a deeper layer of yourself. Not to solve everything immediately, not to understand it all, but to recognize that there is a part of you always operating beneath every surface experience. And only when you are quiet enough to remain in that space can you begin to see what was previously hidden. And that is the next step in rising when no one is by your side. Instead of rushing to find a new direction, you begin to pass through the gate most people avoid, the gate that leads inward. And when you have the courage to enter, you gradually realize that isolation is no longer emptiness, but a depth you had never touched before. If you are in this stage, you may not find it easy to put into words, but you can leave a small sign. Write a single word in the comments. Depth. Not for others to understand you, but to acknowledge that you have begun to touch a deeper layer within yourself. Number 3. Acting without external recognition. And once you begin to see what lies beneath the surface of consciousness, another question quietly emerges, yet cannot be avoided. If no one is watching you, will you still continue moving forward? There is a truth many people do not realize until they are truly alone. Much of what you used to do was tied to being seen. It doesn't have to be a crowd, sometimes just a few eyes, a small acknowledgement, a response that reassures you that you are on the right path. But when all of that disappears, another kind of emptiness emerges, not related to thoughts or memories, but directly to your movement in life. You begin to notice that things that once motivated you now feel faint, not because they have lost value, but because the link between action and feedback has been cut. And in that moment, you face a very direct question. If no one sees, no one acknowledges, no one responds, will you still do it? A viewer named Linda, who works in writing, once shared her story with the channel. She started writing at a young age, posting on social media, gradually gaining attention. Likes, comments, messages of praise made her feel she was on the right path. But over time, that attention faded. She kept posting, but no one responded as before. There was no validation, no signal that what she was doing still mattered to others. For a while, Linda almost stopped, not because she ran out of ideas, but because she no longer had a reason to continue in the same way. She said, "I realized I had gotten used to writing to be seen, but I had never truly written just to write." And then, after a long period of silence, she returned. But this time, she did not post anywhere. She wrote in the morning, wrote in the evening, without sharing, without waiting for feedback. A few months later, she said something very simple. "For the first time, I know what it feels like to write without needing anyone to read." The change was not in her skill, but in her relationship with the act itself. From a scientific perspective, this can be explained through the dopamine mechanism in the brain. When you perform an action and receive positive feedback, the brain associates that action with reward, creating motivation to repeat it. But when the reward disappears, the system weakens, causing the action to lose its initial appeal. However, when a person continues acting without external reward, the brain begins to establish a different form of reinforcement, where motivation comes from the process itself, no longer dependent on outcome or feedback. Carl Jung once said, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." What he pointed to is not doing something to achieve something, but acting from an inner need, a force that does not require explanation or proof. When you reach that point, action is no longer a means to gain recognition, but becomes a natural expression of who you are. At a deeper level, you begin to realize that continuing to act in silence does not just change outcomes, it changes the way you exist. Every time you do something without being witnessed, you cut another thread binding you to the outside world. Gradually, you no longer live in reaction to others' perception, but begin to live from a more stable inner axis. And it is this stability that becomes the true foundation for any lasting progress. This is the transition very few people pass through. Not doing more, not trying harder, but changing the source of action. When you no longer need feedback to continue, a different kind of freedom begins to emerge, where you can keep moving forward, even when no one is by your side. And from that point, your journey slowly detaches from the need to be seen, becoming a sustained movement that depends only on whether you continue walking. Number 4. Breaking the belief that your value depends on others. If you are able to continue acting without any external recognition, then something else begins to surface, deeper and more difficult to grasp. You realize that your sense of value has never truly stood independently, but has always been shaped through how others reflect you. For most of your life, you have not directly experienced your value as something inherent. Instead, you see yourself through the eyes, reactions, and attitudes of your environment. When others appreciate you, you feel valuable. When that feedback disappears or changes, your sense of self fluctuates accordingly. This happens so subtly that you rarely question it, because it has become the default way you understand who you are. But when that reflection is no longer there, what collapses is not just the feeling of being recognized, but the very reference point you used to define yourself. You no longer know where you stand, no longer have a familiar framework to measure your value. And in that state, a very particular emptiness emerges, one where you can no longer rely on what once confirmed you. Carl Jung called this structure the persona, a psychological mask that helps you adapt to the outside world. It is necessary because without it, you could not function in society. But the problem is not that the persona exists. The problem is that you unconsciously identify with it. You believe you are the image others see, when in fact, that is only a part shaped to fit circumstances. In a sharing session, I once heard the story of Adam, someone who was always seen as the emotional support in his relationship. He listened, maintained stability whenever conflicts arose. Over time, that role became the only way he felt valuable. But one day, the other person left. No major conflict. No clear explanation. What pushed Adam into crisis was not the end of the relationship, but the loss of being seen in the way he once was. No one needed him anymore, no sense of being important in someone else's life. He said, "I am still me, but I no longer know who I am when no one needs me." That ambiguity left him deeply disoriented. For a while, Adam tried to regain that familiar feeling, or to find another relationship to fill the void. But nothing felt the same. Only when he stopped and observed that emptiness did he realize that most of the value he believed in had never come from within. It had always been maintained through being useful in the eyes of others. Like a mirror being taken away, you no longer see your reflection, not because you disappeared, but because you had become used to only seeing yourself through reflection. And when the mirror is gone, you stand before a very different reality. You still exist, but there is no image to rely on. Carl Jung once wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society." What he pointed to is that the relationship between the individual and the world always passes through an intermediary layer. And when that layer stops functioning, you enter an undefined state where you cannot use old standards to understand yourself. This state is often mistaken for being lost, but in truth, it is a transition. You are no longer the old version confirmed by your environment, but you have not yet formed a new inner anchor. And that is why it feels empty, as if everything that once held you steady is gone. But if you are patient enough to remain in that state, without rushing to find a new image to cling to, you begin to realize something essential. Value does not need to be confirmed in order to exist. It does not depend on being seen, nor on being reflected back. And in the moment you no longer need a mirror to know who you are, you move closer to a different kind of stability, where value is no longer constructed from the outside, but exists even without any validation attached to it. If what you have just heard touches something within you, press like on this video, as a quiet acknowledgement that you are beginning to detach from what once defined you, and moving closer to an inner anchor that no longer depends on anyone else. Number 5. Withdrawal of energy from the external world, libido withdrawal. And when you no longer need a mirror to know who you are, another movement begins to take place, quiet yet profound. The energy that once flowed outward no longer finds anything to attach to, and it gradually withdraws inward. For a long time, most of your psychological energy has been tied to specific objects, people, goals, expectations, or visions that you believed would bring meaning to your life. You invested in them, followed them, and maintained a continuous connection with the outside world. But when those anchor points no longer hold a central role, this stream of energy does not disappear. It begins to lose direction, creating a space that is very difficult to describe. This state is often misunderstood as a loss of motivation, but in reality, it is a sign that the way your inner energy operates is changing. You no longer feel drawn toward what once attracted you, and you no longer feel the urge to constantly move outward as before. This quietness makes you think you are losing something, while in fact, another process is silently unfolding deep within. Carl Jung described libido not merely as a biological instinct, but as the entirety of human psychological energy. This energy can attach itself to external objects or return inward. When you no longer invest energy in the external world, it does not disappear but begins to turn back, accumulating within your inner self. And because you have been accustomed to sensing energy through external action and movement, in the early stages, you will find it difficult to recognize this shift. A clear example of this transition can be seen in the journey of J.K. Rowling. Before becoming one of the most well-known authors in the world, she went through a period where she was almost detached from every external system that once provided a sense of stability. There was no prominent social position, no recognition, no environment confirming her value. During that time, her energy was no longer attached to any external object capable of providing feedback. Instead of dispersing in many directions, it gradually withdrew and concentrated into a deeply personal inner world, where ideas, images, and stories began to form without any guarantee that they would ever be seen. It was precisely this accumulation, free from external validation, that laid the foundation for Harry Potter, not as a product to achieve something, but as a natural expression of a stream of energy that had returned inward and developed from within. Like a river blocked at its outlet, the water does not disappear, it rises behind the dam, forming a growing reservoir. From the outside, everything may appear still, but internally pressure is building. And this pressure, if not dispersed again, will gradually find a new path, not along the old trajectory, but along a route that has never existed before. Carl Jung once wrote, "Psychic energy is not a static quantity, but a dynamic process." What he emphasized is that psychological energy is always in motion, always transforming its form of expression. When it is no longer attached to familiar objects, it does not stop, it changes the way it exists. And this transformation opens the possibility for a different kind of development, where energy is no longer scattered outward, but retained, accumulated, and gradually restructures the entire way you experience life. And perhaps this is one of the most difficult stages to understand in the journey of rising when no one is by your side. Because you no longer feel pulled forward, yet you do not see where you are going either. You stand in an in-between state where everything seems to slow down, but in reality, a transformation is taking place at a deeper level, beyond what you have ever been familiar with. Only when you do not rush to fill that space with new objects do you begin to realize that the energy has never been lost. It is simply waiting for a different structure to express itself, a direction that no longer depends on what once defined you. And within that silent accumulation, the foundation for another kind of movement begins to form. Not loud, not obvious, but deep enough to change the entire trajectory of your life moving forward. Number 6. Learning to regulate your emotions instead of seeking someone to contain them. And when your energy no longer flows outward, another challenge begins to reveal itself, subtle, yet more direct. You can no longer rely on others to soothe what is happening inside you. There is something many people only realize when they are truly alone. Emotions do not disappear simply because you do not express them, nor do they soften just because you try to ignore them. In the past, whenever something became overwhelming, you could turn to someone, to share, to be heard, or simply to feel lighter. But when no one is there anymore, that familiar option is no longer available. And it is precisely at this moment that you are forced to remain with your emotions, not as something that must be immediately resolved, but as an experience unfolding within you. In the Bible, there is a very particular image of Jesus' journey in the desert. For 40 days, he was alone, without support, without anyone to share with or ease the inner trials. What appeared during that time was not external circumstance, but inner temptations and impulses, voices that required him to face them directly, without escape. And what is remarkable is not that he defeated them, but the way he remained with them, recognized them, without being carried away. At a deeper level, this story is not about external trials, but about the human capacity to stay with what is happening internally without needing an anchor from the outside world. This state unfolds in a similar way within your own experience. When there is no one to hold your emotions for you, you begin to realize that emotions are not something that forces you to react immediately. In the past, every emotion seemed to come with an action. Sadness required expression, discomfort required release, anxiety required something to soothe it. But when that familiar pathway is no longer available, a pause begins to appear where the emotion is still there, but it no longer pulls you into immediate reaction as before. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, it will grow in size." What he pointed to is not the need to eliminate emotions, but the fact that the more you try to avoid or push them away, the more they continue to exist in different forms. But when you stop trying to change or escape them, and simply remain with them, something else begins to happen. Emotions are no longer signals that demand action, but experiences that can be observed. Like standing by the edge of a strong river, if you jump in, you will be carried away by the current. But if you stand still and observe it, you begin to see each movement of the flow, each wave passing by without needing to be pulled along. Emotions function in the same way. When you no longer react immediately, you begin to see that they have their own rhythm, their own formation and dissolution, without requiring your intervention. This does not happen immediately, nor is it a comfortable state. In the beginning, staying with your emotions without trying to escape can feel heavier, as if everything becomes more intense than you are used to. But that very clarity is necessary, because for the first time, you are no longer dependent on others to regulate your internal state. Gradually, a very subtle shift begins to form. You no longer see emotions as problems that need to be solved, but as parts of your experience that need to be recognized. And when that happens, you are no longer controlled by what you feel, but begin to have just enough distance to see them without being carried away. And perhaps this is one of the most important steps in the journey of rising when no one is by your side. It is not about becoming stronger in the sense of resisting emotions, but about no longer needing to run away from them. When you can stay with what is happening inside you, without needing another person to soothe or validate it, you begin to stand in a very different way, independent of circumstances, independent of anyone's presence. If you have gone through moments like this, or are in them right now, share your story in the comments. Sometimes, speaking is not about being solved, but about realizing that you are not the only one walking through this journey. Number 7. The formation of an identity independent of the environment. And when you are able to remain with what is happening within you without relying on any external anchor, a quiet integration begins to form. Everything that once defined you gradually falls away, revealing a state of existence no longer dependent on the environment. There is something very few people realize until they go deep enough into this journey. True identity is not something you construct, but something that gradually reveals itself when what is not you no longer dominates. Before, you knew who you were through roles, through how others responded to you, through the position you held within a system. But when those systems no longer function as before, you enter a very particular state, where you no longer have a clear definition to hold on to, yet you are no longer forced to become anything. I once knew someone named John who worked in education, where he was always seen as an influential figure, someone who inspired others. For many years, that identity became almost inseparable from who he was. But after a period of stepping away, no teaching, no appearances, no environment to sustain that role, he entered a very different kind of silence. No one called him by familiar titles anymore, no constant validation of his role, and he said, "I no longer know who I am when I am not standing in front of others." But within that period, something else began to unfold. It was not that he found a new definition, but that he gradually no longer needed any definition at all. He still read, still reflected, still existed in his own way, but no longer questioned whether those things defined him. And after some time, he realized something very strange. When he stopped trying to become someone, he began to feel clearer than ever, not as an image, but as a presence. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." What he meant is not becoming an ideal version of yourself, but the process of removing layer after layer that once covered your true nature. And this process does not happen by adding, but by allowing what is no longer aligned to fall away. From a scientific perspective, this experience can be understood through how the brain constructs the narrative self. Research shows that the sense of who I am is formed by the brain integrating memory, social feedback, and personal roles into a coherent story. When external feedback diminishes, this system loses the data needed to maintain the old story, placing you in an undefined state. But at that moment, another form of awareness begins to emerge, no longer based on narrative, but on direct awareness of present experience. At this stage, you begin to exist in a very different way. You no longer need to constantly define yourself through words or images. You no longer feel the need to prove who you are, nor to maintain a fixed form for others to understand you. From the outside, this may look like uncertainty, but from within, it brings a unique clarity, not from knowing who you are, but from no longer needing to ask that question. This is not a final or perfect state. It is a new foundation where you are no longer bound by the need to fit into any image in order to exist. And because of that, you can move, change, adapt, without feeling that you are losing yourself, because your self is no longer confined to any fixed form. And perhaps this is the deepest point in the journey of rising when no one is by your side. It is not about becoming independent in the sense of separating from the world, but about no longer needing the world to confirm your existence. When you can stand without a role, without reflection, without definition, you are not just moving forward, you are existing in a way you have never experienced before. A way of being that is independent, yet stable enough to move through any circumstance without losing yourself. And when you look back at this entire journey, you may begin to realize something very different from what you once believed. Moving forward is not always about going faster, achieving more, or becoming more visible in the eyes of others. Sometimes it is a quiet process where you gradually detach from what once kept you in place. Expectations, reflections, anchors that seemed necessary, but in reality only made you dependent. A person can go very far without anyone noticing, not because they are hiding, but because they no longer need to be seen in order to continue. They do not build themselves based on attention, nor define their value through the world's response. Instead, they move from a foundation that no one can give them and no one can take away. If this video resonates with you, share it with someone who is also quietly walking their own path. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to continue exploring depths you may have never encountered before. Because this journey is not about becoming someone else, it is about no longer needing to become anyone other than yourself. Have you ever wondered why the more you want something, the more it feels like it slips from your grasp? Why the more you think, the more carefully you calculate, the harder you try to control every possibility, the more exhausted and uneasy you become? Perhaps you believe you haven't tried hard enough, haven't been disciplined enough, or haven't been strong enough. But what if the truth is that you are trying too hard? We are taught that to get what we want, we must tense ourselves, keep pushing ourselves, and keep everything under control. Yet Carl Jung saw the human being in a different light. He believed that the greatest deadlocks in life cannot be resolved through force or rigid effort. They can only be surpassed when something within you changes. In other words, it is not that you lack action, it is that you are acting from a place that is too anxious. When you live in tension, the unconscious receives a very clear message. This world is not safe. And the task of the unconscious is not to bring you everything you want, it is to protect you from risk. So no matter how hard you try, there is still an invisible force inside that slows you down. You still chase the goal, but you chase it in fear. You still talk about manifesting, but underneath is a lack of trust in the flow of life. So what happens when you relax? It is not giving up or surrendering, it is that you stop fighting yourself. This video is not about miracles or quick formulas. It speaks to a Jungian truth. When you relax, you begin to manifest what you
All right, y'all. My apologies. I was busy taking care of business in the background, but did y'all enjoy that video? I hope y'all did. I gotta go. I gotta work my slave position.